Hi, I'm Holly, I'm a writer, and I just wanted to talk about, because I got a comment, right? And so I wanted to talk about the books and stuff that inspired and are very, useful in some very specific ways for my current novel that I'm writing. A little bit of background, my current novel is about a pop star who, she's at the height of her fame. She's on her first ever stadium tour. She's doing really well in terms of popularity and being everyone knows who she is and they want to go to her concerts and they want to have her on TV and blah blah blah. And then a missing persons case from 8 years ago comes up, is brought back up by the family of the guy who went missing, and she gets really freaked out by it because he went missing in the same place that she used to live 8 years ago when she wasn't famous yet and when she was still trying to write the album that would get her a record deal basically. And so she is basically dealing with sort of the height of her fame coming at a time where her mental health is very bad and is declining. But that's kind of all you need to know. I've got videos on it. If you want to see the process of me writing it and stuff and plotting it and blah blah blah, actual in-depth coverage of the specific that book. But I wanted to talk about these because I thought that was a really good video idea. The first thing I want to say is that the way that I would pitch this book, the sort of the content titles that I would use, which aren't actually books, would be if Act 2 of the Short and Sweet Tour by Sabrina Carpenter was sung by Alex Mahone from Prison Break in series 2 and 3. That's it sounds kind of insane, but basically the main character, I realized that there were a lot of similarities between her and Alex Mahone in terms of the way that their stories sort of evolve in a way. Because I was watching Prison Break for the first time while I was plotting this book, and I was and also the Short and Sweet Tour Act 2 specifically is very much the sort of vibe that she is supposed to have as a singer, and the sort of the dramatic imagery, the pictures of some of these parts from that sort of specific part of the tour really really fit with the vibe. So we're gonna go into it. The first book actually isn't one that I own a physical copy of, which is, I just kind of refuse to pay money for books that I already have read, So it's The Yellow Wallpaper by that's really bad. I can't remember. It's something Perkins Gilman. Is it? Or am I getting confused? I don't know. It's The Yellow Wallpaper. It's a very famous story. It's very short. I think it's literally 40 pages. It's not even a novel. But it basically follows this woman who is experiencing postnatal depression. And the cure for it at the time was to take you away and give you lots of rest and fresh air and stuff like that. And so she's basically not locked, but she's kind of stuffed away in this attic room, and there's wallpaper, and the wallpaper presumably as well, as well as her being mentally ill, it is possible based off of the sort of time period that she was just experiencing paint and wallpaper based, because of the way that they would make things. They were not very keen on knowing that lead was poisonous, for example. And so lead was used in everything. But basically while she's up there, she starts to see images of this woman trapped in the wallpaper, and then she slowly but surely ends up believing that she is the woman trapped in the wallpaper. There is a level of that in my story. It's not anywhere near the same, but there is this very consistent sort of the way that the narrative is written. I try to exaggerate almost her struggle with mental health to really make it clear that you understand that this isn't real, but she doesn't necessarily, even when she says that she knows it isn't real, she still treats it as if it's real. She has some delusions, she has basically she psychosis, right? Like it's her mental health is the sort of purpose of the book. It's a literary novel. It is focused on her character. It is literary crime because, as I said, the missing person is a pretty big part of it. But he isn't really like her like sort of experiences in this book are the focus, and it's not supposed to be a book where you find out every single part of what is right or what is wrong and what you should believe and what you shouldn't. It's a book about this woman going through mental difficulties and the reasons why she does that and the reasons why it's perhaps a cycle that she locks herself into. And it's like supposed to be dramatized so that you kind of understand how it feels for her. Because I think sometimes, yes, there is a risk of making it a little too dramatic, a little bit too like fake, and I'm aware of that, and this is a first draft, so I'm not being too worried about that right now because I can fix that, but I think specifically that there is a level of, when you're writing a story, you want to really convey to the reader that, like, yes, this isn't exactly what is happening, but this is how it feels for her, and you need to feel that. And so I'm kind of playing it up a little bit just so that you can really see the way that she sort of falls right into this mental health crisis. And that's basically it. That's like the point of the book. That's what I was doing with it. And it just, to me, it reminds me of The Yellow Wallpaper and the way in which that is portrayed and the way in which the narrative sort of changes as she gets more mentally unwell. There's really not a lot to say about that book. It's very short. But the next few are all a little bit longer. In fact, 2 of them are like 600 pages. The first, some of these, they're going to seem like a really tenuous. You're going to wonder why I think that these count as inspiration. But I think that you have to understand that when I pick apart certain pieces of media, I really love like specific elements. It's like how I said about like Act 2 of The Short and Sweet Tour, this one specific character from Prison Break, or like this specific sort of the way in which the narrative unfolds in this book. This is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Now, I am writing my dissertation on Donna Tartt's books, and so I have a lot of tabs. I really feel a lot of things about this book. I first read this many years ago, literally when I was a teenager. I was doing my A-levels and I wrote an essay on it then, and that's why I wanted to do an essay on it for my dissertation, because I was like, I felt like it was so interesting. And one of the things that I found in researching this and in looking up especially like interviews from Donna Tartt, this group doesn't really get punished for their actions. To give, again, spoilers, because I kind of have to in order to explain like the elements that basically this book follows a group of students who kill one of the members of their friendship group, and they're all involved in it, and there's other stuff that gets done. But basically it's about them, the reasons why they kill him, and the way that it affects their group. And they don't get caught by the police. They literally, like, it's mentioned explicitly that part of the reason why they don't even get really considered by the police as suspects is because they're very respectable, wealthy people, right? Like, they come from respectable families. Like, it's not assumed that they're gonna be the suspects. It's assumed that these other people who are criminals in other ways are going to be the suspects. And so the story is told from the perspective of Richard, who is a working class man who enters this group, and he's kind of like an outsider who's also kind of an insider, but he's never really an insider. And that was always really interesting to me. My dissertation isn't going to be on the same topic that my essay that I wrote at A-level was, but the essay that I wrote at A-level was about how the upper classes are impenetrable to those who aren't already in them, and especially like to the working classes. And so there's a lot of stuff that I wrote about how like Richard, you know, he was allowed in, but when they felt that he didn't get them or something, he was kind of cast out. And then it was their choice when he would come back into the group. It was them who didn't tell him about the other stuff that happened until it became like a problem that he had to be aware of. And then they kind of drag him into this murder thing and make him, you know, guilty of a crime, whilst he actively, he goes along with it and he feels almost like a loyalty to these people, but then they kind of ditch him afterwards and they don't really talk, and he thinks about them a lot and he never really moves on from it. And I just think that it's really interesting. And specifically, the one thing that I have really found that I was like, oh my god, that's brilliant, I need that, thank you. Donna Tartt did an interview with, I think, a friend of hers. I'll try and find the interview if people want it, but it was like an interview that she did. I found it on, like, I think it was on JSTOR maybe, but it was basically where she said in that interview that the characters constantly get woken up in the middle of the night by each other, by their fears, by their nightmares, because they don't get punished by, as I said, the law, but they sort of punish themselves mentally. And she said that it was kind of like this sort of Gestapo-esque idea of like them being waking up in the middle of the night and there being something wrong and them never being able to really rest as a result of what they've done. And I just find that really interesting. And in the case of, because I hadn't really thought necessarily about my influences beyond the like sort of the one that I gave you of Short and Sweet and Alex Mahone, but I thought about it and I was like, you know what, it is a lot kind of like The Secret History, in where the main character, you know, it's going to be up for debate whether or not she ever did anything to deserve the pain that she puts herself through. But as I said, she goes on a mental health journey that declines. That is like the whole point of the book. And it just, like, specifically, the idea of it for me was that whether or not you believe that she is innocent or guilty of anything, that isn't the point. The point is that she has done things, she has said things, she has thought things that aren't very good. And rather than dealing with them in the right way, and we're going to get to that in a second, she kind of punishes herself for them and makes it worse for herself. And that is like the punishment that she gets. Whether or not she deserved it, that is her punishment. And I think that to me, it reminds me of how in The Secret History, the only punishments that they really get are self-inflicted. They're the ones that they cause by their own actions, and that they, you know, there's no actual official judgment, there's no justice that is served, but there is from the within, because that sort of leaks out of you, you know, your guilt, your fear of getting caught and stuff, as in the case of this. You know, it really, to me, that is what this reminds me of, is The Secret History and her sort of character and the way that she sort of punishes herself. And I don't know, I think that it's a very, again, it's not the biggest connection in the world. There are probably going to be a lot of people who are like, that's not really like the point of The Secret History, but I've done a lot of research on it, and specifically in that sort of area, and I just feel like when I think of The Secret History, I think about those things. And I just really love the idea of like your conscience being the judge and the jury and the executioner in a world where, especially because like she is a privileged person, she is from a wealthy family, she is like old money rich. It's mentioned explicitly that she goes to a boarding school in Switzerland. Guess who looked up some of the best boarding schools in the world and like the most expensive ones? She is one of those people who's always had it very easy, and that is a huge part of it as well, like the class relationships. She talks about that a lot, about her sort of privilege, but she talks about it from the position of a privileged person who doesn't really necessarily want to admit that she's privileged. So I just think that there's a lot there to be said and I think that it reminds me a lot of my book. The other thing, as I said, is about choices. This is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. This book, I want a medal because there's like a tiny, tiny, barely noticeable crease in the spine. But I read this entire book with its tiny, tiny script and its huge margins, despite the fact that I didn't want to annotate this copy. And eventually I will annotate a copy, but not this one. But I read this and there's no marks on it, so I want a little medal for that, thank you. But basically, East of Eden, if you don't know, to sort of summarize this 600-page book in a very quick way, it's about two sets of two brothers. There's the original two brothers, and then there's the sons of one of the brothers. Both are very similar. There's this sort of idea that like one of the brothers is bad and one of the brothers is good. And that is like a whole thing, is that one of the brothers, the son of the other one, he kind of tries to break the cycle. Like, he doesn't want to be bad, he just doesn't know how to be good. And then he ends up continuing to do things and make mistakes that end up being like the thing that make him seem bad, right? Like, he's just one of those kids who, it's like he's almost been prophesized to be a bad kid, and so from the very beginning he's kind of doomed to be that way. And it's about like lineage and whether or not you are able to break free of that and stuff like that. You know, very much the sort of thing that I wanted to talk about, because my main character, as I said about, you know, the secret history stuff, she makes a lot of choices that make her life worse. And she makes them sometimes because she feels that they're the only choice. She makes them because she doesn't know any better, because she's a bit thick sometimes. And sometimes she just makes them because she's not the best person. She's just not the best. And so she has certain thought processes that, you know, it's kind of like a vindication. She feels that she has to do or say certain things because, well, I'm not in the wrong. I, you know, am entitled to this. What could, you know, you can't really blame me for whatever. And so she does like certain things that they just make her life so much worse. And I think that when you look at her sort of decision-making skills throughout the course of the novel, so many things that could have just been avoided, so many things that she could have just been honest about or talk to people about. And I think that's like the thing, is that I never make a judgment on whether or not she is objectively guilty of any one thing, right? I never say like this is for a fact a thing that she should be punished for. What I do is I do what these characters do, where they make decisions and then their decisions are kind of like, I actually mentioned this in the novel, they're kind of like, they're decisions that are fixed points in time that were always going to be made. Things that happened to her that she was never going to be able to avoid one way or another. And so she feels as if her life was always going to end up the way that it is. And she feels that there's this inevitability, that there's this, you know, lack of agency, despite the fact that she has had a lot of agency. She doesn't understand her own privilege at times. She doesn't understand, you know, the real consequences of certain actions. And then by the time that she's made them and committed to them, she's like, oh, well, it's too late. And so you have this story where you have a character who doesn't want to be bad. And a big part of the story, which is it's not said explicitly until like the halfway sort of point, but there's a lot of stuff that I leave out. There's like a flashback chapter where I show like a lot of stuff that happened when she was living in the town where the man went missing from. because I think that it's really important to her character that you know that she went through years of living in this small town. The small town is based by Palomar Mountain in California. It's like a fictional like area of a real place, but basically the idea is that she lives kind of like a long way from like major towns and stuff. You know, she lives like out in the middle of like the woodsy, very like natural area, and it's beautiful, but it's also not like the place that you go to live usually when you're a wealthy young woman who can live anywhere that she wants. Her parents bought the house that is explicitly mentioned. They bought it for her. This is kind of like her I'm a grown-up stage, and she goes there and she has experiences and she grows a lot as a person, and it affects the way that she is for the rest of her life. And then she remembers this man going missing and like the time of that happening, and how, you know, these things were really, really significant to her. And there's stuff that's left out, like certain conversations and stuff that get sprinkled throughout after and before, you know, things that aren't mentioned in the flashback chapter. That's the point of what I'm talking about. Because I think that sometimes that is like, again, it's like the idea from the Yellow Wallpaper. It's her experience. It's how she thinks of things. It's when her narrative is very unreliable. The way that she talks about certain people and certain things, it changes depending on whether or not she's feeling very indignant about it, or whether she's feeling very self-pitying or very like guilty or whatever, right? In this book, we also see a lot of that. We see the characters regretting that they are viewed as being like the bad son, like the, you know, the son who everybody expects to do bad things, and the one who nobody really expects anything of, and the one who condemns his family members to misery by doing this or that or that. And I think that it's really important to understand that like those same characters who really feel sad about it and who you can really sympathize for also do things that like they shouldn't be doing, and they didn't have to do them. You know, they made that choice, and it's understandable in a way why they made that choice, but also you watch it and you think, oh, like why? Why did you have to do that choice? And I think that's how I wanted it to feel with her. I want you to be able to have sympathy for her. I want you to be able to think that she didn't really do anything wrong, whilst also being able to say that maybe she did do something wrong. That maybe you think that she's like the worst person ever and you're rooting against her. You know, maybe you're glad that she's suffering. Maybe you're not glad that she's suffering. Maybe you really feel for her. And I did that very specifically. And it, like, there's a lot of choices that I made that were very specific to make the focus be her experience of this rather than other things. Like, yes, there is the mentions, as I said, of like the classism and the fact that she, for example, the very beginning, she has like disdain in the very opening page for somebody who has, you know, home bleached hair, like blonde from a bottle that they did at home. But then she 8 years ago had blonde hair, despite the fact that she's not a natural blonde. But hers was like done at a professional salon that cost a lot of money. And so the idea is that she has this sort of image of certain people that is based off of her own prejudices. And that informs the choices that she makes, which is why it's there. You are able to make your own judgments about her as a person, whether or not she deserves what she goes through or not. But I think that there's something of the relationships between the brothers, and specifically their relationships to their fates and their sort of the personalities that they were like destined to have almost, and the way that they are portrayed in East of Eden. John Steinbeck is brilliant. I remember reading like years ago of Mice and Men, and then I was just like, I don't know how I would feel about like The Grapes of Wrath or anything. The Grapes of Wrath I absolutely loved. It is, I think, maybe like my joint favourite. I'm gonna have to read it again before I officially say that, because I have only read it once, but I think maybe next year I'll reread it and we'll see, because I really, really liked it. And I did like East of Eden. This, to me, it wasn't as good. This is considered, I think, by a lot of people to be like his magnum opus. And I really like it. Yeah, it's... So basically, as it says here, the generations helplessly reenact the fall of Adam and Eve and the relationships of Cain and Abel. So the storytelling that he does in general in like his novels is really fun, from what I've seen. And I say fun, they're very serious, but they have like this sense of like human relationships with people, but also with themselves, that I really like. But this one especially, like the relationships in this, like The Grapes of Wrath is about a bigger scope. This is about specific individuals and about the nature of these sorts of things that happen and the role that we play in our own lives and how much agency we have in those lives. And I just think it's so interesting. And for this book specifically about a woman going kind of through that process, I just thought that that was like a really good thing. And it actually took me a really long time to figure out which book, because I knew that there was at least one book in my life that I had read that was like based off of these ideas and stuff, that I knew like it was like something that was in there that was making me feel like this was such a good way of going about it. And then it took me days of looking at my bookshelf to figure out what book it was before I literally was just like, oh, it's John Steinbeck. Of course it is. And then the final one, I think I've spoken about this before. This book is one of those books that I think will be very inspirational to me forever, basically. I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was really beautifully done. And it's got like, to me, the way that I would sort of explain why this book is so much, not like a blueprint, but like something that, especially like with my upcoming books, I don't think I've really spoken about this, but I plan on writing next the book that I have just called sort of Actress. It's like, I have a Pinterest board and it's literally just called Actress. But that's, again, it's about a famous actress who has like a mental situation, a little bit different to the pop star book. However, I think that there's something to be said about like beautiful aesthetics. You know, this tour and her beautiful home and the contrast between the glamorous sort of Hollywood life that she lives, where then she goes to this like cabin in the woods kind of thing. And then with the Actress book, it's going to be, you know, there's going to be like the film and also her actual life playing alongside each other. So there's like two narratives at the same time, because I think that that's really important to the story, that you understand what the film is that she's doing. But it's basically about an actress who's doing like an 80s campy summer horror film, and you sort of see that story, but you then also see her real story. And I think that the decline of like women in beautiful places and in beautiful positions and who are famous or very well off, that's like really fascinating to me. The book that I want to write after that is about a famous couple who film a romantic comedy together. But again, it'd be like not necessarily like a rom-com, but like a literary novel about their relationships with each other and their relationships with their fame and stuff like that. Because I just think that that's really interesting. And this book, Teddy by Emily Dunley, this is about a woman who is from a wealthy American family, like politicians and business, you know, and she marries this man and she gets a picture taken of her with this other man who kisses her, and she doesn't want him to kiss her, but he's very powerful. He's like the boss of her husband, and she's kind of miserable because she's having to live this life that she doesn't feel that she's very fit for. You know, her husband wants a very classy wife and she kind of isn't that. You know, she has had a lot of things that would be considered scandalous. It's set in the past. You know, she's had a lot of sex outside of marriage, and she kind of feels almost like she has to do the right thing by her husband to save his career, to save their reputations, to save her family's reputation. But it's never really in her control. Men, especially, are the downfall of her character. They control everything in her life, even when she's unaware of it. There are things that she isn't privy to. things that she probably should be privy to, things which really throughout the course of like the novel, like they unfold, and she thinks that she's like finally getting a handle on things, and then she's finally getting control, and then the rug is pulled out from under her. And I think that there's something really fascinating to me about that, about women who have this beautiful life, and it's like the most like aesthetically pleasing sort of like imagery in this novel. Like this is set in Rome in like the 1950s. Literally imagine like Roman holiday, except the Roman holiday, you know, the vibe, but with like the men ruining a woman's life and her having no agency and her trying to find agency. I think that that's really just exactly what I love. Even Formation Lab, you know, I think it's very thematically different from what I'm writing like now and what I will be writing in the future. But for my first novel, it still very strongly had the mental health themes. It had a woman in a position of fame experiencing what that really meant for the first time. And I think that that is just really an interesting concept to me, because I think that women's mental health especially is very important to me. Writing about it really helps me. I think it's one of those things where it's like, I feel like you never really see accurate representations of what a panic attack is like. And then you think, okay. But then, you know, I've been writing panic attacks. I've been writing moments where things feel a little bit jilted and you don't really know why, where things just feel off. And I think that this book is really great for the combination of the vibes, but also the more serious discussions of like a woman's place and a woman's, as I said, her agency in a world which isn't necessarily built to give her that. And I think that this novel also generally follows, you know, a woman who, it switches between the past and the present. It switches from her sort of being very naive and realizing that she's very naive to her being like, you know what, maybe I can regain a bit of power here. Maybe I could do this. And I think that there's something in that which I really love, because when it comes to the sort of downfall of my main characters in their mental health or in whatever else, I want it to seem inevitable. I want it to seem like it's out of their control, but I also want them to actively take part in it. I want them to be there doing things, not knowing how bad that decision is going to affect them in the future. I want them to be living these lives and being very grateful, only to find that things are very wrong the second that they start getting used to it. And that's why I love this book. It was just really good. And I think that every now and then, you know, there's just like this sort of vibe of like a need for women in fiction to be brilliant, you know, in every way. They have to be smart, they have to be funny, they have to be, you know, pretty, but like they have to also be strong in a very specific way. There's a lot of the way in which women are portrayed, especially in like, you know, I think we're at a point where in society women are expected to be a bit of everything, but they get criticized for being anything. And that book to me really summarized that feeling, because she isn't the smartest person in the world. She is very naive. She does make mistakes, but also her mistakes are completely forgivable ones. They're ones that don't make any difference to her life in any way. And it feels like, you know, a lot of the problems are put onto her by other people and are ignorant to the fact that she literally like hasn't done anything wrong. And I think that I like to write stories about that as well, which again, it ties into the idea that you can decide for yourself how good or bad my main character is. I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to spell it out for you what I think you should think. I think that she's not the best person ever, personally. But I also have a lot of sympathy for the situations that she ends up in. And it's not like I hate her. I'm able to acknowledge that if she was a real person, I probably wouldn't like her very much. But it's up to you when you read it. And I think there are going to be some people who think that it's kind of like a Gail Dinner book, and that's fine. But I also think that there are going to be some people who read it and they see it as, well, like The Secret History. In that case as well, that is kind of what it is. I think that there are going to be people who would read the book, especially when it's finished and it's polished and it has like the way that the things are all portrayed is like polished, you know, and it's not just me going blah blah blah. Because that's what it's like to write a book, the first draft for me. It's kind of just like, oh, and this would be great, and this would be, and then you have to dial it back a little bit and kind of add a bit more emphasis into the moments that need it and blah blah blah. In The Secret History, there are a lot of people who romanticize it. A lot of people who think that the characters are all wonderful. They wish that they were friends with them. That's, again, it's like, it's not the point of the book, right? They're objectively terrible people. And they do objectively terrible things and they get away with it. And they know that they can get away with it because they are wealthy, privileged people and they're white. And so there's a lot of racism and stuff and they just get away with it. And it's like, that's kind of the vibe of the book, is that they're horrible people who get away with it. And I think there are a lot of people who have different opinions on that book. And so I think that mine's going to be the same, in the sense that, yes, there is like a way that I intend for it to be seen, but I'm also not pushing for you to see it that way, because I think that this is one of those books that's really going to benefit from you interpreting it how you want to interpret it, and from you reading it and thinking about it and like adding your own thoughts to it. I just think that's really, really sweet. So yeah, those are the books that kind of remind me of my book, and I hope that that was interesting. I think that they're all books that I would recommend you read. The Secret History, in my opinion, was the most difficult to get through of them all, because there's like 200 pages where basically nothing happens. East of Eden was probably the second most difficult, just because it was one that I really wanted to pay attention to and remember the dynamics between certain characters, because even when a character sort of left the story, they never really left the story. And again, it's like a generational story about, you know, based off of like these sorts of real world sort of things that we know about, these concepts that we think about, and the way that they're examined in this book and put forward is very interesting. So it takes a little bit more brain power than, for example, Teddy does. The Yellow Wallpaper objectively is the easiest. It literally, I think, is like 40 pages max. And it's brilliant. You could probably read it for free online. It's probably old enough for that at this point, but I just think it's great. And if it wasn't so short, I would have bought a copy by now, but I refuse to spend like a tenner on a 40-page book. So I don't know, but thank you for watching. Next video will probably be something to do with reading, I think, and then I'll be finishing the first draft of my book in, I think, the next 2 weeks. So thank you for watching and I'll see you then. Bye.